religion or a historian of religion, I am supposed to know something about each and every religion around the globe, past and present. And I think that actually compared to quite a few of my colleagues who are Islamologists and friends also, some of them quite famous because they are very good, I do have this comparative perspective on religion, including Islam, that I think is helpful. And I do believe that in these days, where, at least in Denmark, but many other places, all the public focus is on Islam, I think it's very helpful to have people analyze critically and also participate in public discussions from the perspective of comparative religion and not just Islam or Islam studies. Why? Because in that way you manage to deal with, so to speak, Islam as just one of many religions and not just something extremely special. And it's a little bit the same, of course, with the majority religion in a country like Denmark, namely Christianity. I find it very helpful that it's not just Christian theologians who are studying that or scholars specialized in Christianity. So I have actually ventured in my life to write articles and books about Christianity, something that, of course, some theologians will oppose, but I find it very helpful to be able to look at Christian rituals as any other rituals and to compare things. And to just mention one of my good colleagues from sort of over here, Aaron Hughes, who has written several books on Islam. One of them I was writing a review article on. And I criticized him because I thought that what he needed to do was to step outside his sort of Islamologist perspective and look at things from a comparative and even more historical point of view. So when you have the Hajj, you have to be able to look at the Hajj from sort of the insider's point of view and from inside all the primary sources, but you also have to put it within the framework of just another pilgrimage. Just like you have to, from my perspective as a scholar of religion, look at the Prophet Muhammad as one prophet among others, so that you know something about prophecy and prophets in general before you look at Muhammad. So this is sort of my sort of way of doing it. Then a few words about my past, I would say, because I have retired now and I'm still sort of doing research. But what I have been doing for many, many years is to be an expert to the media. And this matters a little bit. On religion. And I had my big time when it was back in the early 90s, I would say. And journalists, mainly at that time from the big newspapers, but also radio and television, constantly called me and asked me about this or that. There was one other scholar of religion, Michael Rothstein, and he and I, at some point during the Muhammad cartoon crisis in 2006, we were ranked as the number 10 of all scholars in Denmark, irrespective of their field, who were sort of experts to the media. Then came the cartoon crisis, and after that, my fame sort of disappeared. Or rather, nobody wanted to call me anymore. I may have sort of the opportunity to tell you maybe why that happened. But of course it happened because I did say something to that newspaper that had published the cartoons that they didn't like. And they didn't want to hear what I had to say about what they had done. Because I didn't speak in the way that they wanted me to do. And that's something we can come back to. But anyway, I was an expert to the media, so I was very well known, but it also took a lot of my time. And it was, for at least 15 years, almost always questions about Islam and Muslims. If it had been in the early 80s or 70s, everybody would have asked me about so-called new religions, or youth religions, or whatever you wanted. But now it became Islam. So it's always Islam. So it's us over against Islam, Islam over against us, Islam in Denmark, Islam and democracy, Islam and war, etc., all of the time. Because that was now the significant other. So Islam in my time became the significant other because of politics of identity. In all of Europe, as everywhere else, we were not Muslims. Muslims coming to Denmark were strangers. And how should we deal with this very strange kind of new religion? Now, that's one part of it. The other part that I want to tell you about is something that will set us going. That is that I did a lot of work, not only in the university, but also out there in public, lecturing, teaching, everybody I thought at that time, police officers, the foreign ministry, foreign affairs ministry. I was giving lectures at hospitals for doctors and nurses, prison personnel from top directors to all those people on the floor. I was lecturing school teachers. I was giving, together with a colleague of mine, Jensen, so very specialist on Islam in Denmark. We were giving lectures to whole schools where they closed down the school for one day and said, we are only going to hear about and listen to those two persons or three. We had an anthropologist woman also, in order for us to know something more qualified about our new kind of pupils and their parents. Because the Danish schools were getting more and more, even if it compared to the United States, relatively not that much, multicultural or multi-religious. So I made up calendars for festivals for the municipality of Copenhagen, and we went around and taught all of these people about this. And I've been doing that, and we have been trying to teach about religion and teach about Islam in schools, upper secondary school in Denmark. We have a compulsory religion education, which is study religion-based. And since 60 or 70% of the Danish population or youth go through that gymnasium, upper secondary school or high school, you would think that when they got out, they were smarter nowadays than their parents. You should think that journalists and politicians in Denmark 2025 knew a little bit about Islam because they must have had at least 24 lessons in high school. But it seems as if no. And I'm a little bit sort of worried about this because I also have another part of my job, that is to promote the study of religion-based religion education. Because I think everywhere in the world you ought to have citizens who are capable of critically analyzing what the media and the politicians said about religion and Islam. I think that's part of a democracy, to have enlightened citizens who can also be enlightened with regard to religion. But then some of my colleagues, where they don't have such a school subject, come up and say, okay, Tim, so you talk about this, and nowadays it would be called religious literacy. But what good has it done in Denmark? Can you please tell me what kind of effect it has actually had, that you have now for 35 years had a study of religion-based, extremely qualified school subject called religion? And then you look at the media and the politicians and the ignorance that you can find all over when it comes to any kind of religion. Now, we're talking about Islam today. In Denmark, it would be a thorny issue, even today. Now, last year, February, I'm getting retired, so me and my wife, we went to Florida. I'd sworn that I would never go to Florida. Now I'm getting so we went to Florida. And I have a very good relationship to the public relation managing woman of Scientology in Copenhagen. I like her a lot, she's a very good woman. And I said, oh, we are going to the west coast of Florida. They have their flagship place over there, Scientology, in, what's it called? The place that was hit by the Tampa, in the Tampa area, right? And I said to her, can you manage to get me in there? And she said, yes. And I said, good. So a trip was arranged. They would host me and my wife for a day on evening. And we had some very well-educated friends of my wife for dinner. And we said, we're going to Florida. Oh, that was the first of Florida. But then we said, and then we're going to visit science. And they said, oh, you're crazy. That's not true. They're going to brainwash you. You know how bad they are, right? They eat children. And we started to discuss. My wife has also been teaching about sort of Scientology and taking her pupils to Scientology headquarters. Like I've taken pupils to mosques, etc., right? We could not persuade well-educated people in Denmark that it was not dangerous for us to visit Scientology. And it's a little bit the same thing that you have nowadays with Islam in Denmark. And this is where I start, right? That things have not improved, unfortunately, despite everything I have done since the late 80s in order to sort of enlighten people in Denmark about Islam. So this is the starting point. And I find it extremely important for me to say so because it gives you the background of my career, but also of a scholar who is, of course, a scholar, but is also an engaged citizen. And this sort of talk will sort of reflect that fact that yes, I try to be impartial, neutral, objective in my research, but I cannot always stay impartial and neutral when I lecture about, for instance, Islam in Denmark. I have to also, with journalists, speak my mind. Most recent call I had from a journalist was on the plane over here yesterday. We were about to take off. We had 2 or 5 minutes for him to ask me questions. He had done research on traditions of celebration of Christmas in Danish public schools. Not private Christian, but public, so-called secular schools. The tradition in Denmark is for Christmas, and it's very sort of, again, it's different from the United States. You have, it's not really a wall, but you have this First Amendment, right? But in Denmark, we don't have a First Amendment. But we have schools that are supposed to be secular, but they are not, because we have an established church, and we have a majority religion called Christianity. And we have actually in the national curriculum for the public school saying that all pupils should be taught about Danish culture, so that they become intimate with Danish culture. And then they should learn something about other cultures, not to get intimate, but to know a little bit about it. But this kind of knowledge means to a lot of people that of course they have to know something about that part of Danish culture that is the majority religion, Christianity. And the natural thing for them, for the schools then, is to take all the pupils to church at Christmas time. And it's only fanatics like me who would take my children out of that. Or, of course, some Muslims who will say, what is this thing? Not all Muslims, because some Muslims will know that this is quite okay. But still, this journalist asked me, what do you think? Now, these schools say that they are doing it, despite the fact that we have groups of Muslims, not many, but still sitting there amongst the pupils. And they would say they have to also know intimately something about Danish culture as Christianity. And then he said, but there was one teacher who said that he was doing several things. He also took the children to a mosque, and he had an imam come and tell them about the sort of the notion of Jesus Christ in Islam. And I said, that was a smart teacher. And he said, but what do you think about the other schools? I think, well, I think they're not so smart. And then came the extra part of it. This is where I want you to see that I'm trying to change my idea what you shift, right? What do I say? So you can see when I move from being the scholar who is relating things in an objective, descriptive, whatever, explanatory way, and then to the engaged citizen who will say something that is normative. Because then I said that I think our politicians in Denmark are making so many extremely dangerous mistakes, and our journalists as regards Islam. because I think that they are creating the monsters that they think that they are fighting. And they are doing that because they do not want to do what they say they want to do, namely integrate Muslims. They want to assimilate them. And they do not speak to Muslims as if they were grown-up adults. They speak to Muslims as if they were children who had to grow up very fast and to become just like us. Right? And if you do like that, and you are a young guy, and somebody comes and do that to me, when I was young, I would have done this immediately. So what you do by way of your public discourses on Islam and politicians doing this or that is to create that kind of radical sort of Muslim that you think that you are fighting. And I have to say that I think this is a wrong strategy. And I think it's dangerous, and I've been trying to say that for 35 years. Nobody listens. So this is my political part, right? Now we can start. It's just to warn you, right? There is another warning, that is that if anybody here thinks that he or she should not see the Muhammad cartoons or other cartoons, then please leave the room, right? Because I'm going to show them up here. And I'm just saying this, that it's, yeah. But let's start with this recent thing, the burning of the Quran in Denmark or in Sweden. It's not a Scandinavian specialty. It happened also in Spain hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And we know also now, because a lot of talk about anti-Semitism, that we have also had burning of the Hebrew Bible at some point. And I think that some scholars who think that burning books is only the beginning before you start to burn human beings has a lot of truth to it. And I think that quite a lot of the intention behind these burning of the Quran is to provoke the Muslim minorities to such a degree that they turn to violence, and therefore then you can say, oh, this is how they are, right? They're violent. They are not democrats. Freedom of speech, they don't respect that. They cannot control their feelings, so they prove that they are exactly as radical and militant as we say that they are. And therefore, after a while, we can get rid of them, because we don't want to have it. We'll send them out. Like, here we'll see also a mass deportation at some time. Let's see how they will do it. That's the intention. I can then add that this guy, Rasmus Paludan, he is both a Dane and a Swede. He has been the head person in this. He was sentenced to prison in the beginning of November in Sweden, which was quite sort of noticeable. The first time it happens, and it was an unconditioned prison sentence, and then he should pay a fine. In Denmark, it has not been like that so far. We'll come back to it. Here we have the faces of Muhammad as drawn by some cartoonists in Denmark. After the Jyllands-Posten, this Danish newspaper, asked them to draw Muhammad as you see him. Some of these drawings are absolutely, totally innocent. Actually, they make fun of the newspaper. They ridicule the newspaper instead of ridiculing Muhammad or Muslims. But the whole idea was that Muslims could not handle freedom of speech. And artists and politicians and others in Europe and in Denmark, they were so scared about the reactions of the imams and other states, etc., that they put censorship on themselves. So in order to sort of not do that, we had to prove that we could do this. And there was a story about an author who was writing a book for young people about Islam and its history, that he had asked to have illustrators draw Muhammad, and they said, we cannot do that. Not just because of the whatever tradition of not making images of Muhammad within Islam, not a perfect tradition, so to speak, it's absolutely valid all the way around, but because of the reaction from Muslims. We don't know really if that author really had that problem, but this was how it was. And these cartoons were then published, and several Muslims in Denmark, of course, took offense, but nobody ever
in Denmark did anything violent with regard to this. There was no demonstrations like we saw elsewhere in the world, and burning of embassies, but burning of flags, burning of embassies, it was very, very, very heated at that time. This was the most offensive image drawn by a cartoonist who is now dead. But he has a street named after him in Denmark because he's a hero. Because he was a freedom fighter and he was not afraid. There was even one Muslim who tried to attack him and kill him with an axe. And he had, of course, police protection all of his life after this. Kurt Vestergaard was his name. And what you can see here is, of course, a grim-looking face, and you have turban or whatever you call it, with a bomb in it, and then you have the creed written into it. Some people tried to prosecute Jyllands-Posten and the cartoonist, but the director of the public prosecution said no. And they wrote a long statement about that, and we are not going to have time to go into their arguments. I think that they argued wrong. I see why they sort of said that this is not something we'll take to court, but I think they were wrong. Inter alia, because of the creed in the turban, sort of signaling much more than just one violent terrorist in speak, but Islam as such. So this was Mr. Islam, so to speak, and therefore it could be said to be blasphemic or offensive to that. And I also thought that they should have taken heed of Muslim notions of blasphemy throughout history, but they did not. So they were trying to say that this was not sort of such a serious or grave incident of offense or making mock that it should come to a court. I was called to the office of this public director of public prosecution, and I told him about the traditions of blasphemy in Islam, and said, well, they listened, but it was not sort of something that influenced their decision not to prosecute. But the interesting thing is that this Kurt Vestergaard, he actually produced this in the summer right before 9/11. And now we have something that you know about. If you had forgotten about the cartoon case, 9/11 you all know something about, right? And this drawing was made before 9/11. Lots of people think that everything about Islamophobia or problems with Islam happened after 9/11. Forget about it. Islamophobia and anti-Islam has been with Europe, at least, ever since Islam came into being. And this is what I've been giving lectures about all over the place. That is, images of the other, the significant other throughout the history of Europe. And it was just sort of the, what do you call it, the drop that sort of overplayed them all, overflowed. But this was before. And this drawing was an illustration to an article written by a politician in Denmark who later became Minister of Education, Minister of Immigration, everything. The most influential politician in 30 years. And he was sitting in Strasbourg, the European Parliament, and he took offense of something a young Muslim had said in public, namely, brothers and sisters, go out and procreate, make a lot of children. After all the Danish things that we always make 8 children, so make 8 or 9 children. Then in 100 years from now, we can take over Denmark democratically by way of having more votes. It was a joke. I know the guy, or I knew him at that time. He's a nice little guy. But he was just so tired of everybody saying that Islam and democracy cannot fit. You know, in Denmark, everybody's so proud of their jokes. We are really good at eating hot dogs, right? We are good at eating pork, lots of pork. We are bursting of pork, and then we are always so fun. We always like it. But this time, nobody liked it. Everybody said, what on earth is this guy saying? Here you can see this is what they are all about to do. Now listen. Now the big takeover of Europe has become commonplace. French scholars are writing books about this. You have these fifth columnists, Muslims, working all over to take over Europe. Watch. But this is today. But this kind of notion was there before 9/11. Before you had organized stop Islamization of the United States, stop Islamization of Europe, stop Islamization of Denmark, we had these things. This politician sitting in Strasbourg said, oh, look at what this young Muslim is saying, and now this political party has been so naive as to say that he should be their member of parliament. But don't you realize what you're getting? He pretends that he's a Democrat, but he's not. He's, of course, an Islamist, a totalitarian one, of course. Din var daglig, right? And here in Denmark, we separate state and religion. Nonsense, we have an established church. Here in Denmark, religion is a matter of privacy. Nonsense. We have 2,000 churches in Denmark, and each and every time, Jensen, who is not a member of the church, I have exited long time ago. I am supposed to listen to those bells knowing. I see the churches all over. Religion, Christianity is all over. Still they say it's a private matter. At the same time as the politicians say, of course, that Christianity is at the root of all the social, political, democratic values in Denmark. We didn't have equality of gender if not for Christianity. We didn't have democracy if not for Christianity. We didn't even have hospitals if not for Christianity. It's all nonsense. All of these good values have come in a struggle with Christianity over the centuries. So, but this thing about religion being a private matter, religion not having anything to do with politics, is of course very convenient if you want to control the minority of Muslims. It's a very smart sort of way of governance. But it's a lie. And it was also, of course, very, very popular to say so when Muslims demonstrated in the streets when we had the Muhammad II crisis. And here, look at this. He's coming in, it's before 9/11. Look at the background. It's dark, it's dangerous. It's probably Pakistan somewhere, right? Where you would be scared to go at night alone. And then he comes in with a diplomatic suitcase in his one hand. He has sort of a suit on him, but then he has his alter ego or his true identity under his right arm, which is a Taliban warrior. But you can see it's as if the cartoonist has tried before, 5 years, 6 years later, when he made the drawing of Muhammad. He has already a model for it here. So this guy is coming in to the innocent Denmark, and at some point he will show his real eye as a terrorist. This is the fear sitting all over. This is why you have more about Islam in schools. That is because of security. So the school has become securitized, also religion education. It's all about security. And the danger is coming from Islam. Here you have a cartoonist, I'll come back to him, who has drawn this in 2016, where you have Europe sound asleep. And then what is happening while you are lying there, you can see it. I find cartoons extremely good to use when I teach about these things. You can see this is a strong one also. Take this, it's a PR campaign to pass a law prohibiting the wearing of headscarf in courtrooms. We had one female student who had passed law school at that time. I've met her. She was the reason for this campaign, because the Danish People's Party, who has always had one item on the agenda, that is get the hell out of Denmark if you're an immigrant from a Muslim country or a refugee. And we don't want Muslims in Denmark. They sort of launched this campaign saying that we cannot trust a Muslim to judge in accordance with Danish law if first she gets into the courtroom. She will, of course, make her judgments in accordance with Sharia. What nonsense! She's been sitting at the university for 6 years, and then she's been going through I don't know what in order to get into the courtroom. And it's also all because she is visibly religious. She's visibly a Muslim. What about the Danish judges, male and female, who are devoted to Christianity, but since they are Christians, they don't dress in a particular way, so you cannot see it? What about them? And here you come to something that is extremely important when you're teaching about Islam, minority religions, that is that Muslims are considered children. So they have to grow up. We have sort of an evolutionary ladder where having religion in a way like we have it in Denmark is not only the best, but the correct one. That's true. And that is that you cannot see it. It's not visible. You cannot tell it from looking at people that they are Christians. Maybe a few have crucifix, but most cannot see it. They don't dress in a particular way. They don't combine religion with a dietary sort of rule. They eat everything. Right? So you cannot tell. But of course, they could be equally influenced by their religion in their judgment. So see, it says, furthermore, it says in Danish, underkastelse, and the direct translation is submission. Now we all know that one good, not so bad way of translating Islam or Muslim could be a Muslim, one who is practicing submission to Allah. But it's fair enough to say that you can translate it like that. I hope that you will agree, right? But to say submission in Denmark is something totally different, because only slaves submit themselves to a law, not free human beings. So the whole term sends out reactions in people or immediately motivates alarm in people. That's not a good religion, it's a bad religion where people are not free. This law was passed so that it was impossible to wear visible religious symbols in court if you're an office official. And this is something I can ever so briefly tell you in a lot of how we have had laws since 2008 on religion in Denmark, handling religion. And they have all been aimed at controlling and suppressing Muslims. All, each and all. So the consequences of all this are actually enormous for the whole society and also for other religions. Because in the name of equality, non-discrimination and human rights, you cannot, of course, openly target just one religion. You have to target them all, whether it's Sikhs or Christians or whatever. So, a lot of politicization of Islam has been going on. I said so in 1998, but in 2008 also scholars of Islam recognized that and had seminars and special issues of their journals on this research on Islam repositories. And this is very, very important, because when politicians ask, for instance, scholars of religion or Islamologists to do research, let's say about how many women in Denmark wear niqab, then scholars will work and come back and say, it's very few. Then the politician won't believe it. Or scholars are supposed to write a report on social control. Social control, listen to me, only takes place amongst Muslims. And then of course Jehovah's Witnesses, like that, and Scientology. Nobody believes that I have practiced social control with my children all my life. I did my very best to have my son become a football player. I've done my very best to have my daughter become whatever, right? I even wanted to decide the kind of women that my son took back home. And I said to him, listen, you cannot drag that woman in here, right? Look at her, come on. Of course I wanted to decide because I was their parent. I wanted the best for my children. So why is it so strange that Muslim parents want to decide something for their children, even if they realize that they cannot do it? These children always cheat, right? They don't become the way you want them to become. They become totally different from you, but you try hard. Social control is going on all the place. Look at capitalism. Look at the way girls like my daughter had to look. Whenever they looked in the mirror, there was this ideal sitting there. Is that not social control coming from media, from capitalism, from beauty, whatever it is? It's all over the place. But that is not how we see it. So these scholars looked at social control and wrote about it. And then at page 106, they noticed that two of their respondents, two women, had said that they had actually been inspired by the Quran to go up against male dominance. The government party, Social Democrats, that's unheard of. We don't want that report. Because we don't want to have any good news about Islam. It's not true. The Quran cannot work in that way. There is nothing in the Quran that can lead to that. To opposition, to suppression. You know what? It was taken off even the website of the ministry that had asked for it. And those two women who had conducted the research was never asked to go and give lectures about this. So this Denmark is not a heaven on earth when it comes to freedom of expression and politics and democracy. At least not when it's Islamic. And you can believe this. Everything I'm saying now is scholarly sort of facts. I'm not emphasizing too much. This is about the cartoons again. I had the nerve to go against Jyllands-Posten. It's a long story, we don't have time for it. The editor-in-chief of Jyllands-Posten, one of the most powerful people in Denmark because it was the largest newspaper. All the vice-chancellors, rectors were afraid of him because he could influence politicians. And if politicians thought that Jensen at the University of Southern Denmark was not a good place and he was not a good scholar, it could harm them, even if they were publicly funded and not a private place. So they were scared. He filed a complaint to my vice-chancellor because I had said that Jyllands-Posten tried to offend Muslims. And he and Jyllands-Posten constantly said that that was never their intention. They wanted to, as they called it, provoke a taboo. And then I said, and that was cool, if you want to provoke a taboo, and a taboo is linked to a religion, then you can be damn sure that that taboo will be provoked with the result of some people being hurt and harmed and violated and frustrated and angry. This is sort of logic for children. So if you want to provoke a taboo, of course you should be aware that there could come reactions. But they said no, they didn't want to provoke Muslims, but only that taboo. And since I said that, they filed a complaint telling my vice-chancellor to sort of get rid of me because I had used my office to spread lies about the motives of Jyllands-Posten. And it took me a year to try to get through this. At the end of the day, the committee at the university sort of told me, everybody, that there was nothing, they couldn't do anything, I had done nothing wrong. I had my freedom of speech, etc. And I hadn't said anything that was totally wrong. But still, Jyllands-Posten could publish an article on the front page in the service of lying. So now Tim Jensen has been licensed from his university to lie about Jyllands-Posten. It's a difficult thing, and that may be one of the reasons why I was no longer so popular amongst the journalists after this time, because I had now this mark on my head, an unreliable scholar politicizing instead of delivering value-free information. So it had a lot of consequences. And here you see a minister who had said something about headscarves that was not sort of negative. And then you have my colleague here who has also been sort of saying bad things in public. And then you have me standing there, and I'm telling them that this colleague of mine is so good they should listen to him. But who wants to listen to somebody who has been marked as a liar? So my work was nothing. For 1 week, the two of us figured in a public cartoon in the Daily of Jyllands-Posten. That's a fame. Not so many. It's really rare. So there was a lot of things, but we actually managed to. He also never sort of functioned in public anymore. Now, of course, studying Islam in Denmark is a lot about studying facts. How many Muslims? How many practicing Muslims? From what countries are their origins? What kind of law school do they adhere to? It's Hanafi. How is it with male and female, and all of this, everything of that is studied. The history of Islam in Denmark and the history of Islam in general. But more and more scholars study Islam presently in Denmark. My good friend Jørgen Bæk Simonsen was a specialist in Lebanon. He was traveling always to other countries to study Islam. But since the 80s, he could do with a bus ticket because he started to study Islam in Denmark. So Islam in Denmark has become very popular among scholars of religion and Islam. And I think it's a little bit of a danger. I think we need to have scholars of Islam who are sort of philologically, historically into the past. Too many headscarves and too much politics. We need some other stuff also. But this is how it is. And of course, you cannot study Islam in Denmark and Muslims if you do not study Islam in the region. I wrote that many, many years ago, and nowadays one of my colleagues, Jesper Petersen, he has, by the way, this morning on LinkedIn posted the news that his new book on non-Muslim Islams in Denmark has become published. And this is a research project that he took on. I've said the same thing for years, but he has coined this term, non-Muslim Islam. And that's a very smart way of getting fame. But it is, of course, important, because as I speak, I am also part of the constant creation or construction of Islam. When I write about Islam, and I've done that, I write about Islam being presented in school books and textbooks in Denmark. I'm one of many voices contributing to the image of Islam. Also the image of Islam that some Muslims have, that they can reflect themselves in. So I think that this is important stuff, and this is why I will do a lot about that, and I've already done it. But we have a little time to just a few contexts. And the first one is Denmark. It's supposed to be so that we have freedom of religion, and it is in the Constitution. And of course we do have a high degree of freedom of religion, but we also have an established religion. You can see that in Article 4. And that also means, by the way, when Parliament meets once a year in the beginning of October, there's always a service in the church for all the members of Parliament. It's funny when you say that religion and politics should be separated. Of course, they are free to stay away, but still there is this link. So I won't go through all of this, but this is, we have an established church, meaning that Denmark is not a secular state. And I would say that it's not even secularized. And why do I say that? Because I would say that we have, maybe you could term them irreligious Lutherans, and we have them in a state church that is not a religion according to the Supreme Court decision that I will mention to you. We have a decision saying that whenever the church handles something on behalf of the state, it's not something that has to do with religion, it's the state. But anyway, so We have that. We have 72% of the population, and we are not that many in Denmark, some 500 million paying members. And I think that's a lot less than we had 30 years ago. But it's not just because of demography and the sort of coming into Denmark with Muslims. It's because people leave the church. People do not baptize their children to the degree they did before. Then we have 6 to 8% of the people in Denmark adhering to a different Christian religion than the Lutheran Protestant one, including 4 to 5% statistical Muslims. And a statistical Muslim, what is that? Or anybody tell me what a statistical Muslim is? I'm not saying cultural Christian or cultural Muslim. What is a statistical Muslim? It's a person whose parents have their origin in a country where Islam is a majority religion, or who himself or herself comes directly from such a country. Then you're a Muslim. Meaning there is a danger also that quite a few of the Iranians who tried to escape after the Khomeini revolution, they are also labeled, so to speak, Muslims. And a lot of Palestinians are automatically Muslims, while many of them actually are Christians, right? So that's how you are a statistical Muslim. It doesn't say one word about whether you are believing or practicing or whatever. And that's the number. So it's not a lot, but of course it's much more than in the 60s and the 70s when we had actually almost zero Muslims. So it is a new presence of Islam in Denmark as in so many other places. So again, Denmark is so different from the United States, so different from the United Kingdom and all of it, where you had, for instance, the United Kingdom colonies, where you have people coming into the United Kingdom who come from countries that are part of Commonwealth, England, right, or United Kingdom. In Denmark, the Viking Age, you could meet some Muslims around the world. They only arrived in Denmark in the 60s and onwards as first guest workers, immigrant workers, and when they sort of settled permanently, they could have a reunion of their families coming in, at least to a certain degree. And then we had flows, waves of refugees coming from various places in Europe. Most recently, we have had a lot of refugees from Ukraine, and they are not Muslims, but we have had some Muslims also from Syria recently. But if you look at this, you can see that there is this idea that Denmark is a secular state, which it is not with an established church. That Danish society is extremely secularized, and I ask, how can it be so secularized if 72% are paying members of the church? This is a scholar of religion speaking. I don't buy into that kind of ideas about secularization. I think the term cultural question is a strange term also. I celebrate Christmas. I've done it all my life. I've exited the church. We have a crypt, we have a Christmas tree, we sing the Christmas carols. That's practicing Christianity, even if I like it or not. That's transmitting Christianity to my children. They will then do the same and transmit it to their children. This is practicing religion. It's like having Ramadan. But this is being forgotten, so people talk about this. I think that it's nonsense. And if you look at it, you can see that 66% of all young people in Denmark get a confirmation. That's a lot. That's when I exited the church because I said, I'm not a believer, I don't want to be part of this. And you can see also that, actually 59% are baptized against their will because it's infant baptism. In Denmark, you are not supposed to be religious, but if you're a believer, then it's okay. So I can say I believe in God, yes, but being religious is a sort of bad thing. And you can see that a lot of people don't go to church. Most people don't go to church. But then that again, in the eyes of the public and politicians, it's not because they are less religious always, it's because they are religious in the right way. How? Because if you do not go to church, and the church is not trying to proselytize, not trying to grab, and it is not, it's only hidden. then you have understood what religion is all about. It's about morals. Religion is about morals. Philosophy is sort of the best part of religion. It's religion when religion is no longer religion. So Danes not going to church, contrary to Muslims going to mosque, or Muslims performing Ramadan. Those Danes are religious in a mature way. This was written in one of the big newspapers at Easter time at one time. We have religion in the mature way. And then well understood, the others have it in a childish way. This is, you see, this is how I study Islam. This is reading these things. What does that mean in presence? It means that when a lot of Danes meet Muslims, this is how they look at it. Terrorists, children, immature, people who still have to grow up in terms of religion, in terms of politics, in terms of understanding of democracy. And I think that is a very sort of problematic attitude when you are meeting other people, to think that they should just, as fast as possible, grow up and become just like you. It's a little bit like I have this impression that a lot of Americans, when they are out on missions and wars, etc., because they are there to help the poor Europeans who don't want to pay for it themselves, right? Then these Americans always think that if they come to Afghanistan or Iran, it's the same with things, then if they do the right thing and they are good, then these people will turn out to be good Americans. So you meet a person in Afghanistan, and after 5 years, he or she will become just like you. Because you are the best in the world. The way you have life is the best in the world. So of course they will jump out and become just like us. Probably not. It takes a little longer. So you see, there is something about Marx and Luther, we don't have the time, but it's still all of these paradoxes that I find so funny in Denmark. And when I speak about Islam, it is actually important. This is my passport. In this passport belonging to a Danish citizen who is not a member of the Danish church, you will find this image here, which is an image of the crucified Jesus Christ. The main divinity out of three in Christianity. The number one, so to speak, before God of importance. How can religion be a matter of privacy or a private matter when the state provides me with a passport, so I have to run around with Jesus Christ? It would be unheard of in the United States, or at least so far. And this is why some of my colleagues, when they wrote a book called After Secular Law, Winifred Sullivan et al., and included a chapter I had, then when I had been talking to them, we had meetings, they thought that this was so great. So they put it on the cover of the book, After Secular Law. It's a paradox, you can say, but I find it telling. We don't have the time for this landmark case, unfortunately. I just want to go to Islam and say that we do have these 4 to 5% statistical Muslims. They come from a lot of countries originally. And we have some 35 recognized communities, Muslim, but many more mosques. You don't have to be recognized in order to have your freedom to practice your religion. But some apply for it, and if they apply for it, they will have the right also to marry Muslims with legal validity. This is also a big subject matter in Denmark, that is Muslim women having problems with getting their religious divorce in place. So they can be divorced according to Danish law, but then they have what's called the nikah, and they cannot sort of get out of that in the same way. And therefore Danish authorities sometimes turn to the Muslim imams to have them help and figure out a solution. And especially recently, they have turned to a female imam who has set up her own mosque in Denmark in 2014. Shirin Kankans is also a sociologist of a very, very sort of classical beauty of a woman, and she's running her own mosque in Denmark since 2014. And she also helps these Muslim women to get out of these marriages. But then again, there is an outcry in the media, because how can we have a Danish administrative unit refer somebody to the imams to have advice? Then we are no longer secular, right? And we shouldn't leave it to the imams. It's coming up all the time. Recently, what happened? 2 ministers in the Danish government called imams to a meeting at 10 o'clock because there had been an enquete made by Jyllands-Posten, of course, that had showed that each and every third Muslim said that it was understandable what Hamas had done on October whatever. And there was also quite a few who said that Israel should not exist. And I saw some of the imams who also supported that point of view, and I can perfectly understand their argumentation. Islam cannot exist, but then it should be non-racist. There should be no discrimination of Muslims or Arabs. And there are Arabs and Muslims being discriminated, and there's been so for years. So they said this, and then also some of them said, well, my daughter is not going to marry a Danish non-Muslim man. So Jyllands-Posten, once again you had these people coming out the way you didn't want them to be, and to say wrong things. And right now in Denmark, if you say anything critical about Israel, then you're an anti-Semite. It comes like this. So you're so scared about being critical about the war in Gaza, or the war in Lebanon, or what Israel has done, because you're so scared of being labeled an anti-Semite. So everybody's afraid. And what happens is that we had this enquete, and there is outcry, and two ministers said, we're going to talk to the imams, because they have to teach and preach to all their congregations or all their Muslims during Friday prayer how democracy works in Denmark and what are good democratic values and how equality of gender is a good thing and LGBTQ plus, etc. is absolutely abnormally good, right? What happened was that the day before, the ministers had expressed themselves in Jyllands-Posten about this, saying that we are going to call these imams representatives of some, we don't know really how representative they are, to a meeting in order to teach them, to lecture them. When the imams in the morning read that in the paper, one of them stood up and said, I'm not going to go to that meeting. Because I've been lectured by Danish politicians all my life. If they want to have me for a meeting, it's going to be a dialogue. They're going to listen to what I have to say. I'm not going to listen to only what they have to say. So the meeting actually was cancelled. There was an outcry in the meeting. There again you see these Muslims. Who do they think they are? Always special respect. They didn't come. So this one guy actually persuaded the rest, the 9 others, not to come. And you see, this is a tendency that has started in Denmark after 2012. In 2012, the minister who invited imams invited them for a dialogue. In 2020, the minister didn't invite them for a dialogue, but for a lecture. To teach them how to teach the other Muslims to behave in a proper way. So there is no communication between the highest ministers in the state and Muslim communities in Denmark. It just doesn't function anymore. It functioned somehow during the Mohammed Khatun crisis, because I and the colleague I mentioned before, we managed to have the Minister of Foreign Affairs meet secretly with us and the imams in a mosque and listen. But it was secret. Nobody should know about this minister going to that mosque. So this is, yeah. Then you have, of course, some 170 mosques. They can be classified in various ways. You have organization mosque or layman and sheikh mosque, big city, small town mosque, ethnic mosque, etc. The first mosque in Denmark that looked like a mosque came up in 1767, and then we had one in 2014 and 15. But all the other mosques in Denmark up to then were sort of hidden, invisible, in factories. This is also an important sort of point to notice. And of course, like in Switzerland, nobody really would like to have the call for prayer from a minaret, because that's not Danish. The Marian Mosque, I've already said something about this. The burqa ban came in 2018. Hardly any woman wearing a burqa. I had 2 students, 2 very nice girls who were wearing a burqa. And since I always speak my mind, also with students, I said, why? And I asked them in the classroom, I said, let's talk, why are you doing this? Because it must create a lot of fuss. When you travel over here, you're all black. Everybody says, what is it? And the one said, I did it because she did it. I want to be in support of her. I said, that's good. And that was so fun. I did it because she was doing it. But I mean, hardly anybody, but we had a burqa ban. Department of Justice, before the ban came in, said it's inconsistent with the values and coexistence in Denmark. Covering up gives the impression that you do not wish to be part of society. And we had a lot of UN things about this. Then we had a television show called Mosques Unveiled, where an imam expressed himself in terms that were considered non-Danish. Said to her husband, oh, you have the right as head of the family to sort of control your woman or do something like that. And that was recorded, and there was this outcry, because that's not good. Right? They fortunately don't hear what I'm talking, how I speak to my wife. No mind. You see, I can get away with everything. Nobody comes and demands of me that I should be a good Dane. They want me to keep the law. But they are trying now to read the minds of people and control the minds. Nowadays, in order to become a Danish citizen and formally become a Danish citizen, lots of politicians recently, a week or so ago, have said, we've got to have the mind control. We've got to check that those who are becoming Danish citizens believe in all the same values that we do. Come and ask me if I believe in this. Do I believe in democracy after I've seen the elections in the United States? No, I'm not sure. Do I believe in democracy when I see that they always pick the wrong person to rule the Danish country? No, I'm not sure. Of course I do in a way, but I'm not so sure about it. But yeah, you see, this is mind control that is going on nowadays. A bill to amend, etc., lots of bills, and then of course abolishing the law on blasphemy. This law, politicians resisted to abolish it. And then something happened, as you can see there. Somebody burned the Quran and was sentenced. And people said, freedom of expression is so important. Burning the Quran is okay. So they actually passed a law abolishing the law on blasphemy. And the Danish Human Rights Institute, where I've been sitting in the board, they also said that this was okay. It was a big mistake, and after the Quran burnings came up, it was sort of becoming a problem. Ban on male infant circumcision was discussed. It didn't happen. When it didn't happen, the Prime Minister said we cannot vote in favor of that law because then we will harm our Jewish community. 3,000 to 5,000 people in Denmark are Jews, linked to a Jewish community at least, or a Jewish institution. 250,000 to 300,000 are Muslims. She didn't mention the Muslims. She didn't even want to have the word in her mouth. So it was not in order to be good or nice to the Muslims, it was in order to be good and nice to the Jews that she didn't want to vote in favor of abolishing that male infant. Compulsory translation of all foreign language sermons was proposed. Do you think that it was in order to control the Orthodox Christians from Serbia? No, it was in order to control everything that was said in mosques. The same kind of politicians. A law that annuls all other laws or administrative procedures which might be seen as accommodating Muslim demands for special regard was proposed. It keeps going on. We had a pork case and Christmas case, etc. You have to shake hands with the mayor of the city when you are giving citizenship. Why? Because they have discovered that some Muslim men don't want to shake hands with female, whatever, mayors or whatever. And some female Muslims do not want to shake hands, for instance, with Jensen, even if they like the same Jews. good day, and you shake hands. What nonsense is this? What kind of child is it that you have to greet other people only by way of shaking hands? Now you can see this is where I'm normative. I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's dangerous. And I really don't believe in it. So handshake is an expression of respect. This was a male circumcision. Danishness to eat pork, right? We had a discussion because some, what do you call it, kindergarten? They had sort of started not to serve pork because it was more healthy or easier to not do it, so vegetarian. But then it was, of course, because of these Muslim parents who insisted that their children, according to Sharia, whatever it's called, should not eat pork. So in came the ministers and said, all kindergarten have to serve pork, because here in Denmark, we are Danes and we eat pork. Right? I could go on, but I think that we should go to this burning of the Quran and come into this. We have this freedom of speech article, and then we have, of course, this one on racism still, even if the blasphemy law was abolished. So the hate speech one, but this one was abolished, as I said before. And now we had these Quran burnings. You had them condemned by the UN Human Rights Council. And you had other manifestations. This was an artist who sort of ruined the Quran because she was protesting against the treatment of women in Iran. And we have had all of these other things, but now we had an addition to the penal code. And it says here under chapter 12 on treason and other crimes against the state's independence and security, anyone who publicly insults a foreign nation, a foreign state, its flag or other recognized, etc., is punished with a fine. And then comes in the new one, anyone who publicly or with the intention to further dissemination makes himself or herself guilty of improper treatment of a scripture of significant religious importance for a recognized religious community, etc., will be punished likewise. This is the Quran law. I have already talked about this. So this Quran burning was the image I started with. This is a law that came in for security reasons. Not in order to accommodate Muslims, but not in order to restrict freedom of expression, but in order to secure Denmark with regard to terrorists and foreign Islamic states and whatever they do. As one of my good colleagues said, the Islamic states around the world, they have not worried a dime about it around the world. But quite a few Muslims of faith and practice, they have taken offense. It had hurt them. But that was not the reason why it was prohibited by law. So that was it. That was a little bit about Islam, Islamophobia, images of Islam in Denmark. And there's a big project in Nordic countries about international Islamophobia, because it's not just a Danish, Swedish, Scandinavian, European specialty. It is something worldwide. And I consider it extremely important that scholars of Islam also study Islamophobia and not just Islam. Thank you.
We've got 2 minutes, so if people have questions for Mr. Jensen, we'll give about 2 minutes or so for questions.
Any comments or questions? Yes?
So you mentioned like having education in school about like religions and stuff. Is there any other solution you would say to like fix or to prevent Islamophobia from growing?
The world better place. Well, no, I'm serious. This is why I'm disagreeing with quite a lot of colleagues who think that religious literacy is something very good and will save the world. No, it won't. So religion does play a role in society, does play a role in politics. But there are so many other things that are much more important also to people than religion. But religion education teachers, of course, want to promote their own subjects. And religion scholars want to promote their study of religion in universities, so we will all say it's good to have these scholars. I also say so, but I don't think that it can save the world. And everything we have